Professionally, Gene has completed undergraduate and graduate degrees in material science at Stevens Institute of Technology. But that's not the real reason I asked him to come. Zhenya has participated in actually building a church, St. Michael's Church in New Jersey, which he has put in many hours of his life dedicated to building this brand new church that is just astonishing. I had the opportunity to visit once, and as you may understand, that building a church physically is not an easy task in our society, and Zhenya has put in a lot of work and effort physically into having that accomplished. But now that this church has been built, he also now is having to face the whole understanding of building the church from the inside out. It's one thing to lay bricks and to find money for those bricks and to find agreements with the government to have those bricks built. But now they also have to understand the meaning of building the church from the inside out. And this is something that now he is being faced with as well, although they have a great stable base of people who support each other in this parish of St. Michael's, but it's something that's also that he is also dealing with, and so he is going to share with us his feelings and thoughts on that. So please give a warm welcome to Eugene Kulesha.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Is the mic on? Okay. Your Eminences, fathers, brothers and sisters, conference attendees. Before I start, I just wanted to thank Prince Vladimir's Youth Association and the parish here, St. George's in Salt Lake City. The term awesome is used a little bit too commonly these days. When I was younger, the term awesome was rarely used, and it was described really natural wonders of beauty. And I think the fact that you were able to organize and pull off this conference, amongst some of the most beautiful areas in Utah and out west here is frankly just wonderful, and it's a miracle. So I really wanted to thank you for having me. Thank you for organizing this. This is really great. If every conference could be like this, it would be unbelievable and a huge draw for youth to come and associate with us. So thank you for that. So just starting up, a little bit of background. Just that's me in the center there with my family. Those are my kids. I'm married. I have 4 daughters. Julia, Elizabeth, Irina, Sophia. My wife Alexandra is actually from Canada, from Toronto. If you look at the upper left, that's an image of my folks. They came to the U.S. back in the 1940s. They were war kids. They came here without 2 pennies to rub together, and they were able to educate themselves and establish pretty good careers in their respective fields. But the most important thing in their lives was really working for the church, for Orthodox organizations and Russian cultural organizations, really just kind of preserving everything they knew, everything they had, and passing it on and sharing it with people. So they're in many ways an inspiration. They were an inspiration in my life while they were still alive. Just going across to the upper right, that's an image from Camp Nor, or the Association of Russian Explorers. This is a summer camp that kind of upholds some of the traditions of the old Russian Imperial Army. We do a lot of cultural stuff there, obviously church and orthodoxy is first and foremost. They're a really influential, great organization that a lot of the attendees here happen to go to in the summer as well. On the bottom right is an image of the Russian school that Andrei mentioned. Again, I went there for 14 or 15 rather painful years. Every Saturday morning I was there. And now that my kids started going, or they used to go, I'm a teacher there as well right now, teaching history and religion. The images on the bottom left are maybe a little bit odd, but that's kind of what I do. Again, I'm a materials engineer for what it's worth, and my background is working in medical devices. I was very much into things like 3D printing of titanium, polymers, bone substitutes, things of that nature. I'm working on all kinds of antibacterial coatings for implants to prevent infections. So that's kind of what I do. But really, everything here on the right and the church and all these Orthodox organizations that I try to get involved in and help a little bit are really the most important thing in my life by far. That just pays the bills. So I'll start off with the blueprints, the physical blueprints. Now this is not a talk on architecture. Someone asked earlier if this is going to get into deep architectural discussions and dissertations. It's not. It's really what I think are the requirements for a parish to have in terms of personality, maybe a little bit of skills, and just faith in terms of physically building a church from scratch. But before I go too further, I think we need to go through a little bit of a history lesson on our parish. So St. Michael's Orthodox Parish was really born as an община, I forgot how to say that in English, but a group of parishioners or a group of Orthodox people that banded together during World War II. As World War II was raging, a lot of Russians ended up being displaced persons. Russians, Ukrainians, Belarusians, Georgians, it doesn't matter. They were displaced people, or DPs. So for those of you that don't know what that is, these were people that were basically they found themselves on the other side of the Russian border during the war and then after the war. And if they were unlucky enough to be caught up in the part of Germany that was taken over by the Soviet Union, a lot of them had to be taken back. Many of them were imprisoned, and quite a few of them were executed, simply because they were on the wrong side of the border. Fortunately for these parishioners, for these Orthodox people, again, from Ukraine, from Belarus, from Russia, they were in the American zone, as I understand it. And in 1944, in this displaced persons camp called Zaugau in Germany, they started this община, this group. It was headed up by proto-presbyter Julian Odbowski, no relation to Bishop Nicholas of Manhattan. And actually, if you look here, this is actually Claudia Sisenko. She's actually still alive. She still goes to our parish today. She's probably our oldest parishioner. That's an image of her back there in Germany. When Father George and I, our current priest, opened up some of our archives and we're looking at the Book of Records, what we noted was kind of shocking. Instead of there being nothing but funerals as a war was raging, poverty was rampant, people were starving to death, the Book of Records for services that were conducted were weddings and baptisms. So it wasn't funerals, it was people living. It was Orthodox people living a Christian life despite the fact that the world around them was absolutely being devastated. Their future was uncertain. They could have been sent back to the Soviet Union, but they kept on living. They kept on having kids. They were getting married. It's kind of like, a good analogy is kind of like grass or leaves that find and punch their way through asphalt or concrete. You can't keep some of these Orthodox Christians down, even in the hardest times. So, in 1951, our parish, or the община, moved to America. Not many people know, but that's actually an image of the Great Falls in Paterson, New Jersey. So for those of you from the East Coast, you might know Paterson is probably one of the worst towns in New Jersey, if not the US right now. But back in 1775, or shortly after the American Revolution, Alexander Hamilton, who's a pretty well-known father of America, came and saw these falls, and he said, my gosh, the amount of power that can be generated to run mills requires us to actually build industry and factories around here. I don't know if I mentioned this, but these falls, by the volume of water, are the second biggest waterfall on the East Coast after Niagara Falls, believe it or not. And this is in the middle of Paterson, New Jersey. So not surprisingly, when our parishioners decided to move, they decided to move to Paterson, New Jersey, because there were jobs there. And despite the fact that, again, per the records and per my reading of our archives, despite the fact that a lot of our parishioners were very highly educated, engineers, doctors, lawyers, they didn't speak English very well, most of them. So they had to work in some of these factories, hence they settled in this city of Paterson. This is actually an image of Father Julian. That's some of our early parishioners. Actually, one of these parishioners is still alive. He was the previous church warden, and he's there right now today. This is an image actually of our first meeting minutes of our parish meeting back in 1951, I think, once they settled in Paterson. The first church, it wasn't even in a rented church building. It was actually in the storefront of a food store in Paterson on Main Street. And as you can see in this image, that's the Kursk route icon coming, and our parishioners are venerating it. And you can see in the background the store, food store, it's written there, some local policemen, and you can see, people coming there and worshiping. Obviously, you see the boy holding some candles for a bishop service. So kind of an interesting way to go for a first parish, or a first place of worship. So the first real church happened about a year later. We purchased for $6,000 a Methodist church in the same city, Paterson, in a slightly better area. That was built in 1952, and you can see some of the images of kind of the shambles that the outside of this church was in. And the parishioners really took charge, and they started rebuilding. They built a very nice iconostas, actually back in 1952. Here's some images of them renovating this church, ripping out some of the pews, painting the walls very quickly in order to prepare for the church service that was going to happen tomorrow. And I kind of like this headline here, back when press was a bit more irreverent: Russian DPs, displaced people, red haters, hold rights and own church tomorrow. So kind of a comic change of things. And after a brief period of work, the church was completed, and it looked something like this. So, pretty good effort. Again, handmade iconostas. The icons actually, you can't see them very well in this image. This image is from an old postcard. But the icons were actually painted by Father Kiprian of Jordanville, who's obviously the father of iconography in the Rocourt churches. And really, from the beginning, church life, parish life really just exploded. There was, from the beginning, we had a very big Russian school, very active. Father Julian was still alive. You can see some images from the Yolka or the parish play, the Christmas play images. I believe this was a rented hall, but you can see there's maybe not hundreds of kids, but certainly dozens and dozens of kids, dancing around a Yolka. There are a lot of political organizations back then, anti-communist organizations, scouting organizations that would, gather and use the church for various services. And then, of course, there were weddings and baptisms, just as there were back in 1944. That's actually Claudia, the same girl in the previous photograph. That's her wedding. I think this was in the late 60s. An interesting thing that Claudia shared with me was that, love and connectedness was a very important part of building a church physically back then. And the practice back then was whenever there was a wedding in church, all the parishioners would stay for the ceremony. Not everyone would be invited, but they would all stay for the ceremony to pray and wish well for the parishioners that were getting married. So kind of a different tone, different time, I suppose. Just a quick story, I don't know if you can see, but there's an image here of an older gentleman. His name was Vladimir Leopoldovich Shveda. And he died in the mid-90s, I believe. And I remember seeing him when I used to go to St. Michael's Parish. He was actually the godson of Nicholas II. So apparently, Vladimir's father was an electrical engineer in Tsarist Russia, and he was actually friends with Alexander III. And when Alexander III passed away, Nicholas II, the martyr Tsar, became Tsar during the coronation. They asked him to actually electrify. Remember, this is 1896. Electrify or put up lights all over the Kremlin, within the Uspensky Sobor, the church where the Tsar was enthroned, and he did that. Later on, this gentleman's father was the head electrical engineer. And remember, this is the 1890s, early 1900s, at Tsarskoye Selo, the summer residence of the Tsar. And they had a good relationship, and this head electrical engineer, who was educated in St. Petersburg, actually asked Nicholas II to be the godfather of his son, and Nicholas II agreed to it. Unbeknownst to people, Nicholas II actually had about over 100 god kids, godchildren. And what he did was, for every godchild that he had, the gift that he would allot to them was actually a gift of money that was intended to be used by those kids to get a college education. And this gentleman, Vladimir Leopoldovich, actually, he used that money to get an education as an electrical engineer, and he was able to actually work here in the US as an electrical engineer and feed his family because of that. So kind of an interesting story. Okay, so with time, even that area of Patterson started kind of going downhill. And after about 20 years of being on Hamilton Street, our church moved to Sherman Street in 1971. The image here is basically just a sketch or a photograph, I think a copied photograph of this Presbyterian church that we bought. And you can see some architects just kind of superimposed or sketched on a concept of what our cupola would look like when attached to this church. And it remained pretty consistent with what it looked like till the very end days of when we left that place. We got a new priest at this point. Father Julian, I think, passed away in 1968, and our new priest became Father John Lyoki, who later became a bishop after his Matushka had passed away. He became our new parish priest, and again, parish life continued to bloom. It really continued to flourish. The Russian school, or the Sunday Russian school at the time, was actually the biggest and probably most prominent on the East Coast, if not the entire United States. And again, life just boomed. We continued to have these yolki, we continued to have all kinds of conferences and siyazdi. We moved our ikonostas into this new building. But again, it just didn't really suit us aesthetically. It wasn't it wasn't a church designed in the Orthodox style. But life continued. And from 1987 to 1994, by my estimation, this is when I started getting a bit more involved in the parish. We went through a period of what I call expansion and outreach. Our priest became Father George Kalaur in 1987, a very dynamic person, and he did a lot. A lot of work was going on, under his watch, under his tutelage. We built a big bell, a relatively big bell tower for us. You can see it here. We bought bells, I believe, from Belgium. They were imported. We hung them up ourselves. We had big services blessing the bells, a lot of attendance, a lot of people there. And then the outreach really began as well. This time period was basically the time period of the end of the Soviet Union. There was a lot of chaos, a lot of poverty out there. People were maybe not really getting what they needed to in the local stores in Russia, Ukraine, Belarus. So Father George actually organized, I believe it was 9 individual shipments using these big container trucks that you can see over here on the right. And our parishioners would come by, they would collect clothing, it would be donated, it would be packaged up, clothing, goods, sometimes food. It would be boxed up and put into these containers, and they would find their way across the ocean over into the former USSR, or into the USSR and then eventually the former USSR. This was also a period of time of balls, church events, black tie events. We organized the St. Herman's Youth Conference in about 1992, 1993. I remember kind of being involved in that. We had all kinds of speakers from all over the world attend. So this was really a time of, as I said, outreach and expansion, and kind of a sense of dynamicism was really taking over the parish at that time. So from 1995 to about 1997, we kind of hit our apex in many ways. Our priest became Father Mark Budachuk in 1995. But what we noted was that the second generation of Russians and Belarusians and Ukrainians that had immigrated to the US, their attendance in church was starting to kind of wane. And we really didn't know why. Maybe they just started getting diluted into more secular society. So things started kind of decreasing a little bit within the parish. What we also saw was that Patterson really began a very strong downward spiral in terms of safety and accessibility. And this image here is really what all the houses around the parish started to look like in the early 90s. So it became a pretty unsafe neighborhood. Streets would not get plowed. If you wanted to find a parking place, we had no parking. You had to park on the street, and you had to dig out a spot. And if you happened to move a garbage can from a spot that was dug out by another person, and you parked your car there, there was a good chance your car would get keyed or damaged. So it really was becoming a pretty undesirable neighborhood. Another interesting story, shortly after this, when Father George Zinin, our ex-priest, became the parish priest, he had some seminarians that he had gone to school with were getting married at the parish, and they came down for the wedding, and a few of the seminarians decided to go out the night before for kind of a bachelor party in Patterson, going out to a few local restaurants, maybe to a bar, just relaxing, having a good time. They really didn't realize how bad Patterson was, and as they were coming home, they were actually stopped by a gang, a rather violent gang that had guns and knives, and they were under some serious danger. Unfortunately, this gang didn't realize, but several of these seminarians were actually Russian paratroopers and American Marines. And when the police showed up, it wasn't these out-of-towners that were plastered into the asphalt. It was this extremely violent gang that was all over the asphalt. So they took them in, the gang was actually arrested and incarcerated, and then when the police realized that these were just out-of-town seminarians, they called Father George. Father George came down and got them. They're not bailing them out, he just took them away from the police station. And the police were actually very thankful because this gang was apparently like on the most wanted list or something in this town. So again, things were going south rather quickly. But there was kind of a new light of hope. At that time, kind of the new immigration, or if you will quote unquote, the third wave of Russian immigration started. It started really kind of picking up pace, especially in the northeast of the United States. And that really kind of breathed, in my opinion, a fresh breath of air into our parish. So from 1998 to this day began a period of transformation. Our priest became Father George Zinin, who's over here. That's not a very representative photo of him. He's not that strict. He's actually very lenient, very kind, very fun, very jovial. He became our priest in '98, and then in 2009, a certain one of our parishioners, Andrei Logvinenko, became our deacon. And we realized, look, it was time to move. We really had to get out of there. So we started looking for lands. We went everywhere. We tried to find places that were zoned as churches. We looked at non-church zoned areas as well. But as we were looking for the land, we realized something kind of disturbing. Our paperwork, our corporate papers had expired. So we stopped existing as an organization officially. We were off the records. So we had to go back. I spent a lot of time with our lawyer, kind of reincorporating, reestablishing our non-for-profit status, because without that, we couldn't buy a piece of land. We couldn't buy anything. So we were kind of in a bad spot. It took a few months, but we finally got that fixed. And then our search really began in earnest. And after finding a few places and kind of being disappointed in them, we actually found a piece of land in a lovely hamlet by the name of Wayne, a town called Wayne, New Jersey, where we were surrounded by really nice neighborhoods, woods, we had creeks. It was really just a lovely place, and it was a church. It was a non-denominational Protestant church called the New Apostolic Church. So we decided to buy it. We had some money put away, some capital that we had saved for years and years, for decades, frankly, and we decided to buy it. But ironically, not everyone agreed. Not everyone had the courage, if you will, to go ahead and use that money to buy this place. And this is really what the property looked like. So kind of a nondescript A-frame type of building called the New Apostolic Church. Again, it was zoned correctly, so there was a lot of reasons for us to buy it. Eventually, after convincing some of the naysayers and after a parish vote, we decided to do it. We said it was the right thing to do. And again, despite the fact that we could afford the land, it was in a great location, both geographically and in terms of just the houses we were surrounded, and it was zoned for a church, we still had, we had the naysayers, but we convinced them. We told them, listen, you've got to be courageous. This is the right thing to do. We made an offer. The offer was accepted. And then right around the time the offer was being accepted, our attorney, who was quite good, she was a real estate attorney and a corporate attorney. She helped us buy the land, and she helped us with the corporate papers. She said, listen, guys, I'm looking at this land. There is no way you are ever going to be able to build another church or an addition to the existing church. Even 100 square feet, it's not going to work. And I asked her why, and she said, well, look at the map. We were surrounded by wetlands. So this is the old church. This is what the new church now looks like. And these were the wetlands around us. Now, when I say wet, it wasn't like we were surrounded by a lake, but there was definitely mud, and you could see the water was gathering. But some of the areas were quite bad. I mean, this is an image actually from a couple of weeks ago after a moderately bad rainstorm about maybe 30 meters away from our property. So this was a serious deal, and it was a serious problem. But at that point, we said, look, we've got to get out of Patterson. So worst case scenario, even if we buy this land and just serve forever in this old Protestant A-frame, that's going to be better than staying in Patterson. So we went ahead and we did it, certainly. And then another move ensued. So the image on the upper left is actually our old parish building in Patterson. You can see we rented a crane, and a bunch of parishioners just got together, and they came with their own trucks, very humbly. The crane guy helped us unload our cupola, unload our bells, and then they loaded them up onto our trucks. And this is actually one of my favorite photographs. It shows our three main cupola, which one of them is pretty big, about 7-8 foot in diameter, kind of loaded, sitting on trucks, on station wagons, just making its way, weaving its way through the streets of Patterson. And it was kind of fun. It was a little bit scary at one point because the cross was about 15, 16 feet high. And as we were driving, we were kind of clipping some of these overhead wires. So things got a little bit dicey. So by some miracle of God, we were able to make it out of there. We got to our new place, into our new church, and the same crane followed us over. We loaded up our cupola, and we attached them to our temporary church building. We, of course, moved the iconostas, we moved the insides of the church, our candle stands, and so on. And we served here temporarily for about 2 or 3 years. So it looked good, it looked nice, but again, it was not really an Orthodox design church. It was really more of an A-frame, and frankly, just not quite the aesthetic that all of us were looking for. So before we actually started the journey of constructing our new church, Father George and Father Andrei, are really men of action. And, Otec Andrei gave a lot of kind words. I was by far probably the least involved in all of this work. They really led everything. So I thank you for the kind words, but I don't want to represent myself as really being kind of the mover and shaker here. It was really these two gentlemen. And, they couldn't sit still. So Father George had a friend, and they asked this friend to donate some Russian logs from Arkhangels, from the northern regions of Russia. And they built this chapel, that looks like a Russian mizbah. It's rather beautiful. It's quite nice. We built a roof. It's quite ornamented. We built a cupola from scratch. And what's really interesting is that right around this area here, Father George had the idea of digging an artesian well. We went down about 70 feet. And we're pumping water now into the chapel. You can see here, that's kind of our baptismal font that we use now on Epiphany to bless the waters. And on the other side of the church is a spigot that parishioners actually come by and get fresh well water for their houses and for their use. So it's kind of nice. And again, there were naysayers here about this. People were thinking, well, do we really need this? It's going to cost us money. Of course, it was way over budget. But at the end of the day, now when we drive by this and we see this, we realize that this action really kind of gave a lot of benefit to our parish and to our physical, not only our spiritual, but our physical existence as a parish. So moving on, there were a couple of big things that we faced. As we said, our lawyer, our corporate lawyer, said there's no way you're going to get approval for this. There's no way. You've got federal EPA laws, state EPA laws. The town's not going to approve it with these wetlands. We got a new lawyer, and by some miracle of God, two things happened. We got town approval. I don't know exactly how that happened. It almost like it was when I remember being in the trying to get approval from the town council. It almost like it wasn't even a conversation. It was almost like it was just a race for some reason. So I don't know how that happened. There must have been some technical reasons that we were able to convince everyone to do it, but we got town approval despite the fact that we were surrounded by these wetlands. The other thing was getting money to build the church. The capital that we had was used to buy the property and our existing temporary church, and we really had no money. And we're a relatively small to medium-sized parish, I would say. And our cash flow was okay, but some years we finished with a little bit of a profit, some years we're at a little bit of a loss, but the profit is never more than $5,000, $6,000. So we don't have that extra money laying around. So again, by some miracle of God and with God's help, we got a construction loan for a very significant amount of money. Again, how that happened, I have no idea. I don't think they even looked at any of our statements or anything. They just gave us the loan. So I think, having courage and faith, and in many ways, I think they're kind of equivalent. We'll talk about that later. Really helped us here. We got a local architect, and I think that's important too. Getting someone local who knows the laws, knows the rules, knows the regulations, someone that was open to working with us. She had never designed a church, never designed anything this big, but things worked out pretty good with her. But again, she was a neighbor of ours. She actually was the president of the tennis club across the street. So we wanted to maintain that good relationship, and she was quite competent. And then we got a contractor. That was kind of an interesting journey as well. We interviewed a few contractors, and some of them were very, very dicey. One of them was actually a Russian fellow, and I don't know if he was Orthodox, but he was promising this and promising that, and it just didn't sound right. And our lawyer said, listen, maybe don't go with this person. So we got a contractor, also someone rather local, who was actually an expert in building churches. And it was someone that really cared, in my opinion. I think that was important. Someone that really was dedicated to the project. And even though they weren't Orthodox, they were still trying to help us and do the right thing. So construction finally started, 2018. You can see that's an image of us actually blessing the foundation. We took some relics of a saint, and I can't remember what saint, I apologize. And it was kind of put into the foundation of the church. Metropolitan Ilarion was there, Bishop Nicholas. That's now what is our basement. So that's another maybe small miracle. But the town of Wayne is known to flood in general, maybe not these parts. So if you take that and couple that with the fact that we were in wetlands, building a basement was a bit of a risky proposition. But I have to say, when our sump pumps work, our basement is perfectly dry. So again, we were very fortunate that worked out. And this is kind of what the church started to look like. So again, this was the old church that we bought, our cupola there, and then that's where the new church started going. The church faces east. It's designed in the Pskov style, as you can see. So it's got a lot of nice architectural features. One of the nice things that we were pretty adamant about, Father George in particular, was the interior style. It's made, first of all, it's made of steel, so we didn't use wood. I had a fear of wood rot, dry rot, termites. We used steel, concrete. But the church also has a lot of hemidomes, as you can see over here. That's the altar. Oh, sorry, that's the entrance. That's the altar. Quite a few hemidomes made of fiberglass, and one main dome over here as well, and obviously a ton of arches. So it really adds to the aesthetic appeal, and in my opinion, because it's got a fine aesthetic appeal, it benefits us all spiritually as well. So getting back to the theme of love and people who care, one of the things that we were kind of faced with was we use a lot of Kadzila, the sensor, sensor. Yes. So we use a sensor, and obviously a sensor gives off a lot of smoke or fumium. And that was kind of a problem because the town laws were quite strict in terms of fire restrictions, and they were requiring us to put up all kinds of fire detectors and smoke detectors everywhere. And we told our builder, what do? We use quite a bit of this thing, and the church can get pretty smoky on some days. And he said, look, you've got to put in what's called a laser beam smoke detector. So I don't know if any of you are builders or are familiar with this, but the way it works is basically a laser source is put on one side of the building, and it emanates across the other side of the building where you've got a reflector. So the laser goes from one end of the building to the next, and then back. And it's actually sensitive enough, as I understand it, to differentiate between real smoke from combustion of a fire as compared to smoke coming from a sensor. So that was kind of a big benefit. The next thing that we really wanted to solve, and we didn't really know how, was the issue that in our old parish, a lot of our walls had some of these stains on them, kind of where the joists were, where the structural members were. And again, I wasn't a builder, I wasn't sure what this was coming from. Our old parish had it, and it was actually even popping its way through some of the iconography and some of the paint. You could see it, and that's what it looks like in a house. That's not our parish, but you could see that sometimes. And apparently, what it is, I didn't know this, but apparently the temperature difference, if these joists that are touching that sheetrock are very cold or very warm, they'll attract dust and dirt to them, and they'll leave these marks. And that was kind of scary because we had a lot of sheetrock, a lot of white-facing white walls within our parish building, within our church building. So we talked to our builder about this. He said, no, there's no problem. We can fix that rather easily. So you can see some of these beams here are still, they're just steel, but some of them have this green tape on them. And what that is called ghost tape. It's actually a very thick tape that's insulated, and you put it on top of it. And what it does is it isolates the structural member from the sheetrock, kind of maintaining or eliminating forbidding the smoke to gather on there and to stay in the wall. So that was kind of a nice feature that we figured out. So again, it kind of boiled down to people who cared, people who were diligent, people who had that sense of love and respect in their hearts. I do want to kind of do one quick shout out to this gentleman here. His name is Dr. Alexander Zaitsev. He was one of our early benefactors, and really without his financial support, we would not have been able to get this project off the ground. He's also, just ironically, or maybe, I don't know, maybe that sense of connectedness, he's a big skier, he and his family, and they come to Snowbird all the time. So it's kind of nice that I can talk about him here. All right, and that's what the church looks like today. So, again, in my opinion, some pretty nice architectural features. We have hemidomes, domes, we have a nice main cupola. We actually have a bell tower here that we were able to get our bells up using a lift. The bottom of the church is made up actually of granite plates. The rest of the church is stucco. We realized that if we put the stucco all the way down, odds are it's going to get damaged by pedestrians or by cars, people walking past it. So a fair bit of thought went into really designing this thing rather well and rather efficiently and smartly. So that's what the inside of the church looks like. Again, you see the arches, you see the hemidomes. This was actually our first parish feast day, kind of the early part of the service back in November. Again, Metropolitan Hilarion was there as Bishop Nicholas. That's at Sergi serving. And what you can see though is our iconostas kind of leaves a little bit to the imagination. It's not quite right. That's our temporary iconostas. And that's something I'd like to share with you. That was another journey that we started probably back around 2015, 2016. Buying an iconostas in the US or in Europe is cost prohibitive. If you want to take a good iconostas, a wooden iconostas, and have it hand carved, it costs about $500,000. This was back in 2016. If you want, sorry, $300,000. If you want to buy a marble iconostas in the US or in Europe, Western Europe, it costs about $500,000. So very cost prohibitive. So we said, look, what are we going to do? And Deacon Andre actually had some connections in Ukraine, and they said, you know what, go to China. There's a marble works in the middle of China, not in Beijing or Shanghai, where they actually have some really nice work, very good quality craftsmanship that I think you guys should take a look at. We went there, we designed the iconostas ourselves, we went there, and they actually completed it to our design. So this is what the design looked like. So it's 3 stories, three levels high. This is actually the upper 2 levels. They set this up. This is in China. It's not standing yet. That's the bottom level. And again, our royal doors are made of marble as well. And we have also 2 altar tables that are made of pure marble. I did some calculations. I said, man, that's going to be really, really heavy. That's pure marble. Now, granted, there's cutouts for the icons. But being that that's pure marble, what's the weight of the floor going to have to be? And after some rough calculations, I realized that the weight of this iconostas, and again, it's not that big, it's going to be standing on an area roughly this wide, spanning about 45, 50 feet, is about 2,000 pounds per square foot. So this is significant. So we had to make sure that the architect put in a steel structural beam below the basement to support this thing. So that's there, and actually construction of this iconostas is starting today, ironically. We're putting it together. Just an image here. This is what our altar table looked like as we were assembling it. So the detail is quite nice. They really did a good job, I think, maintaining the faces of the saints and our Lord. Some nice detail. One really interesting thing, though, is these columns are actually not wood. This is made up of marble that's local to that part of China. So they were able to kind of interject that as trim all along our iconostas as well. So once it's up and running, this should look quite nice. Okay, so what are the physical blueprints of building a church, the physical building of a church? Number one, I think love. Your heart really has to be into a project. If it's not, you're just not gonna succeed. If your heart's in the project, it's going to work out. Wisdom. You've got to use your head, right? You've got to know what your limits are. Have courage, but also have wisdom. It's really tricky, I think, to know how far you can go, how far you can push. Courage, though, as I said, is important. There's a big risk in building a new church. There's the risk of alienating your parishioners that don't believe in you, that don't believe in the project. And there's frankly a big risk of losing love amongst each other, because there were arguments and disagreements that really kind of pitted different factions against each other. So you've got to have courage to overcome that and then leverage the love to overcome some of those disagreements. Patience. There's nothing but obstacles, both spiritual and physical, as you're building a church. Whether it be wetlands that are surrounding your church, and lawyers telling you it's never going to work out, to getting money, to getting a loan. So I think that's another critical, important thing. And frankly, action. Action is really the most important thing. Creating something from nothing is very, very difficult. Every person really has to be humble, and humility is the last thing. They have to be able to take upon any job, no matter how dirty, how difficult it is. So I think those are really the four pillars of building a physical church. So let me segue into what I think are the spiritual blueprints of building a parish, really. So the first thing that really comes to mind is love. And as St. Paul said, whether we live into the Lord. Whether we die into the Lord. Whether we live, therefore, or die, we are the Lord's. And one thing that I've consistently seen over the years with different parish priests, for our fathers, the reposed are as living and are there as much as the living parishioners. Father George before him, Father Mark, they put as much attention into thinking about, praying, remembering, talking about all our reposed parishioners. So their love is great for them, as it is obviously for the people that are still alive. As you can see in these images, Father George, whenever he serves at Panihida, as he does here on the left, he's always very passionate, very emotional about it. It's nice to see, just as he is when he's serving Maliabne or blessing something or serving a liturgy. He's always happy. He's very emotional, very, very inspirational, inspired, frankly, about it. Another good quote, I think, was written by this fellow Robert Browning, who was a Victorian writer from the mid-1800s. And he said something kind of deep. I don't know if he was a spiritual person or not, but he said, if you take away love, our earth is just a tomb. We're just empty. We're nothing without that. So wisdom is another one. Our minds are really the greatest tools ever created. Use them. Be as wise as serpents and as innocent as doves, as Christ said. And then kind of a cute little folk saying, and again, this is where you have to know your limits even when you deal with people. A wise man lowers the ladder before he jumps into a pit. Each parishioner, so again, trying to build a church, a parish in the spiritual sense, it's important to remember for leaders, I believe for priests as well, that every parishioner is different. Every person is unique, and every person therefore needs a unique approach. My family's spiritual father was Archbishop Andrew of Rockland, who actually was a spiritual son of one of the last Obtina elders, Niktari, who actually died under Bishop Andrew's Ipatrichil. He would treat every person different. With some people he would be strict, with some people he would be very lenient. He always tailored his approach individually to different people to bring the best out in people. And I think that behooves all of us, or anyone that's in a leadership or a position of influence within a parish. Courage. I think this is kind of an interesting one as well. As St. Paul, as Apostle Paul wrote, 3 times I was shipwrecked, a night and a day I was adrift at sea, on frequent journeys, in danger from rivers, danger from robbers, danger from my own people, danger from Gentiles, danger in the city, in the wilderness, at sea, and from false brothers. And I think another great quote was written by Father Jan Christiankin, who was the elder from Pskov. He died about, I think, 12 years ago. Apparently, in his last will and testament, he had, as I understand it, one sentence: fear nothing except for sin, which really makes a lot of sense, very logical. That's the only thing you really have to be afraid of. And lastly, kind of another quote from the famous Roman statesman and philosopher, and this is kind of an interesting mathematical axiom: a man of courage is full of faith. So if you notice, I don't have faith written as one of the pillars to build a church, but if one has courage, what makes up courage, and one of the big elements of courage is having faith. So I think that's an incredible thing. In this day and age, we need the courage to build the church, but we all, in this day and age, need courage to really, stand up for what's right and not really cower to the trends and the agendas of the time, which are really becoming quite overwhelming. And I see that all the time. I saw that in Father George dealing with people. I saw that with Father Mark dealing with people. And again, that's something that I believe is really a critical part of parish life and building up a parish existence: courage. So patience. Patience is not the ability to wait, but the ability to keep a good attitude while waiting. I don't know who wrote that quote, but that's a really, really clever one. And as it's related to building parish life, we can never forget our missionary spirit. This includes being missionaries to Orthodox as well as non-Orthodox. I'll never forget a story that I was told once about an old man who was in a parish up in Canada. This is many, many years ago. And some young teenager walked in off the street with his hands in his pocket. This old man walked up to him and kicked him out of the parish. He said, "You can't walk into a church with your hands in your pocket." And the boy left, probably never to be seen again. And it kind of hit me, well, by doing that, that person may have put this young man's or this teenager's soul, at great risk, frankly, because the person now never comes back to church because of a mean interaction he had with one of the parishioners. That's a big problem. Another story. My current obedience in church, I'm the church secretary. I used to be the warden. My current obedience is to stand behind the candle stand. And I have to say, on big feast days, whether it's Christmas, Easter, or Pentecost, it gets pretty stressful there. I feel like I'm working the Starbucks at Grand Central Station in New York City, and it's just busy and it's stressful, and all kinds of, I call them tourists, walk in and they ask all kinds of weird questions and have weird requests, and they're complaining about this, they want this, they don't want that, they're not acting right, and I have to restrain myself. Very often I feel like I'm going to just lose my temper with these people, and I try to stop myself and say, listen, even though I'm just the guy at the candle stand, I'm kind of an ambassador here, and if I say something bad to this person, and that person leaves the church possibly forever, then that's on me, that's my fault. So, and that's not hard to do. I shouldn't say that. It is hard to do. It is hard to be good to people, especially working in that type of capacity, as I'm sure all our priests can attest to here. Action. So I don't really have any thoughts on this other than this quote, which was written by Dale Carnegie, famous American industrialist. And action breeds doubt and fear. Action breeds confidence and courage. If you want to conquer fear, don't sit at home and think about it. Just go out and get busy. And I think I see that all the time, going back to the day when we were organizing these shipments out to the former Soviet Union. I see that in the Russian school that we have now, people getting involved. I see that in our sisterhood who makes these big meals every day, every Sunday to help pay us for our rather big mortgage. I see it all the time. I saw it in Father George, I saw it in Father Andre, I saw it in all the priests that we talked about over the last 70 years. So that's a big thing. You've just got to get up and do it. And I think that's exactly, and it's congruent with what Matушka Patricia said this morning. I didn't see her talk, but I can see there's a lot of parallels here between what she said and what I'm trying to convince you of. So this is kind of a good one. I think humility is probably the last and perhaps maybe even the most important thing. So St. Augustine said it was pride that changed angels into devils, and it's humility that makes men as angels. I remember being an 8-year-old student in Russian school, and the first history lesson we got was that Russian princes, or the princes of Rus, were always the first to wake up and the last to go to sleep. And that was kind of beaten into our heads for years and years and years. And I see that same example with all our priests. Father Mark, their two Father Georges, Father Andre. They're the first one they're obviously the first ones at service. They're the last ones out the door, but they're also the first ones when there's a work weekend or an event that's being planned. And you can see that here with Father George Kalur blessing the container truck, Deacon Andre and Father George lifting up a 600-pound top of our altar table, and Father George here. This is a great photo, wearing an apron cooking up stuffed cabbage for the work crew. So, you know, they really do put themselves last if they have to do that. So, in conclusion, really, the pillars that are required to build a church physically are the same pillars that are required to build up a strong parish life spiritually. Love, wisdom, courage, patience, action, and humility, frankly. And that's all I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you so. Thank you so.